Coming up on the Mindful Midlife Crisis. Now, I won't give you a play-by-play of the day, but needless to say, I would have been okay with that day never ending. And that's what I mean by a top 10 day. It's not necessarily that it's one of the 10 best days of my life, but if I live to be 80 years of age, I'll have lived 29,220 days. 10% of that would be just under 3,000 days. Now, there's that old corny saying that goes, it's not how many breaths you take, but how many moments that take your breath away. I don't need moments that literally take my breath away, but I do want more moments in my life that elicit that somatic experience created by that feeling of joy. Welcome to the Mindful Midlife Crisis, a podcast for people navigating the complexities and possibilities of life's second half. I'm your host, Billy Lahr, an educator, personal trainer, meditation teacher, and overthinker who talks to experts who specialize in social and emotional learning, mindfulness, physical and emotional wellness, cultural awareness, finances, communication, relationships, dating, and parenting, all in an effort to help us better reflect, learn, and grow so we can live a more purpose-filled life. Take a deep breath, embrace the present, and journey with me through the Mindful Midlife Crisis. Welcome to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. I'm your host, Billy Lahr. Thank you for tuning in wherever you are. I am still in Seoul, South Korea until the end of 2022, and then I head off to Thailand for 6 weeks. So if you're like, why does this dude sound like he's in an echo chamber during some of these episodes? It's because I'm recording from whatever accommodations I can afford. And sometimes, like in the case here in Seoul, all I have is a bed and an end table that goes up to my shins. I've got this little makeshift studio now that you can see if you're watching on YouTube. I've got curtains drawn behind me. I've got subway trains running nonstop behind me, so that is distracting. But I'm just making the best of what I have here in hopes you'll connect with today's episode, because at the end of the day, the purpose of this show is to provide a platform that gives people the space and permission to share their expertise and life experiences in order to help others navigate the complexities and possibilities of life's second half. But on the first Wednesday of every month, I'm going to drop a solo episode to share my travel experiences with you and how those experiences are helping me navigate my own mindful midlife crisis, which is actually like more of a midlife pivot, I would say, than a crisis, because if I'm being honest, I'm feeling pretty good about where I am in my life. But if you've been a fan of the show and you've been listening since day one, you know that hasn't always been the case. So I'm happy to share my experiences with you on the first Wednesday of every month in the hopes that my trials, tribulations, and successes will inspire you to take intentional action to live a more purpose-filled life. Now, just to be clear, this free and useful information is helpful to people of all ages. You don't have to be going through a midlife crisis in order to appreciate this information, to appreciate these experiences, this expertise that we're sharing on this show. So if you're in your teens or your 20s or your early 30s, please don't tune out just because you think my guests and I are too old to help you learn anything. Wisdom comes from one's ability to process the impacts of their life experiences, and oftentimes experience comes with age. Not always, but a lot of times it does. So don't be too quick to dismiss what us Gen Xers have to say, because you never know what life is going to throw at you. And there may be a story or two in this podcast that helps you be better prepared for the challenges you will face later in your life, whether those challenges be your emotional, mental, and or physical well-being, your relationships, your children or your future children, your career. We talk about all those things on this show. Who knows what curveballs life is going to throw at you, but I do know that I would have greatly benefited from this information when I was younger. I say this in every episode. I'm sure people tried to tell me stuff like this all the time when I was younger, but I didn't listen for one reason or another. But I'm telling you, these conversations are universally applicable. That is a mouthful to say right there. And they will help people of all ages reflect, learn, and grow. So if you hear something that resonates with you in this week's episode or in past episodes, go back and check out some of the other episodes at www.mindfulmidlifecrisis.com or wherever you get your podcasts. You may have noticed that the production value of the show has been a little different in the past month if you're a regular listener. And that's because I switched production teams thanks to Kevin Palmieri over at Next Level Podcast Solutions, who simply made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I do want to thank Dave over at Podcast Engineers for the work they did at the start of season 6 and throughout the summer sessions because they made my life so much easier. Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you so much, Podcast Engineers. But thanks to Kevin's podcast business coaching and the team over at Next Level Podcast Solutions, they have helped me clean up the show a little bit. So that's why there's a new intro. That's why there's new segment break music. There's less banter on my part, except for this episode. It won't be like this all the time during these solo episodes, but I've got some housekeeping things that I need to take care of. So just bear with me here. There's a clear intro. There's a clear outro. There's no meditation in the middle anymore. Just making all of these changes so that it's a more enjoyable listener experience for you because you're my number one priority. So let me know what you think by sending an email to mindfulmidlifecrisis@gmail.com, or you can give me a follow on Instagram at mindful_midlife_crisis. You can also visit our website at www.mindfulmidlifecrisis.com and join the newsletter there. And hey, if you like this show, be sure to check out Kevin's podcast, which is Next Level University. I'm actually hoping to have Kevin on as a guest in the near future as well, because he's just a great dude. And like me, he just wants to help other people win. And I love the energy. And more importantly, I love the expertise he brings to that mission. So November's episodes really pulled at the heartstrings a bit as we unpacked our trauma and adversity toolkits with Dr. Sri Walker. I can't believe I forgot to talk to her about her ACEs score. ACEs, for those of you who don't know, means Adverse Childhood Experiences. And basically, it's a questionnaire that tallies the amount of abuse, neglect, and adversity a person has faced in childhood. The closer that number is to 10, the more likely that person is for being at risk for a variety of socioeconomic issues or having physical, emotional, or mental health issues. If you remember from that episode, Dr. Sri Walker's score is 7, which means she overcame a lot of abuse, neglect, and adversity in her life to get where she is today. So I promise you, we're going to have her back on the show to talk about that. But if you missed that episode, go back and check out episode 71, Navigating Trauma Through Resilience, which was actually our first YouTube episode. So if you want to watch these episodes on your television or your phone or your computer moving forward, go to YouTube and type in the Mindful Midlife Crisis podcast and subscribe. We followed up that conversation with the fiery personality of Dr. Lena Haji, who shared with us just how impactful acts of service can be for our self-care. And I think the next episode, which was Jason Clausen's story of losing his wife to cancer and using that tragic experience to bring sunshine to families going through a similar tragedy, reinforced Dr. Haji's message of how acts of service can, in fact, be acts of self-care. Last week's episode was probably the most emotional for me because of how I randomly met my guest for episode 74, Brooke Malik, who just so happens to live like only 10 miles away from me in Minnesota. And yet the first time we ever met was in some random restaurant in Seoul, South Korea, while she was with her sisters, who she met for the first time ever the night before. I mean, once I found that out, having her on the show to tell that story was a no-brainer, and she did not disappoint. But because of that random connection we made while we were in Seoul at the same time, I'm proud to say that Brooke and I quickly became good friends, and we hung out one day while we were in Seoul. We laughed, we just talked, and I got to know more about her life. And once I got back to Minnesota, we maintained that friendship because it turns out she's a pretty amazing person beyond the story that she shared. And now that I'm back in Seoul, I miss her dearly, and I miss her mad cackle. And Brooke, if you're listening, I hope you're doing well, and I miss your face, but I do not miss your stupid jokes. It's the first Wednesday of December, which means I have been back in Seoul now for 2 months, and I have 1 month to go before I head to Thailand for 6 weeks, Singapore for a week, and Japan for like 8 to 10 weeks, long enough to see the cherry blossom trees that have been on my bucket list of travel adventures forever. And then I'll probably head back to Korea one more time for as long as they let me stay. And if you're like, wait, you're going to go back to Korea for a third time? Well, yeah, that's my current plan because as I discussed in summer session 6 with my good friend Iggy Lee of the Soul Share community, the people I have met here and the friendships I've made here have made me feel so incredibly welcome. And I'm starting to get into a groove here. And that groove has allowed me to do so much growing as a person in the past 2 months. So what I want to do is this. I'm going to take a quick break. And when I come back, I'm going to share with you what a recent top 10 day taught me about embracing the somatic experience of joy. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. If you're enjoying what you've heard so far, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Also, giving the show a quick 5-star review with a few kind words helps others find and benefit from this podcast just like you are. Finally, please spread the wealth of free knowledge and advice in this episode by sharing it with the people in your life who may find this information and my mission to help others live a more purpose-filled life valuable. My hope is that these conversations resonate with others and inspire people to live their best lives. Thanks again. And now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. Today, I'm talking about this renewed sense of joy that I've been feeling ever since I returned to Seoul, South Korea. Now, if you followed along with the summer sessions, then you know that I'm no longer in the United States because in October 2022, I returned to Seoul to carve out a new life for myself after I resigned from my 21-year career in education way back in November of 2021. It's weird to me to think that that was a year ago. That's wild. But if you haven't been following along and you're wondering what I've been up to this past year or what this journey has been all about, go back and check out episode 39 as well as the summer sessions episodes. So as I said, what I want to do today is share with you why I've been feeling this overwhelming sense of joy ever since I got back to Seoul, in the hopes that it will inspire you to recognize what brings you joy so you can be more present in that somatic experience those moments create in your body. And if you're wondering, what's he talking about with somatic experience, go back and listen to episode 34 with Brett Hill, where we talk about the language of mindfulness, and you'll get a better idea as to what we mean by the somatic experience of joy that is created in your body. Now, another flashback episode here, episode 9, where Brian on the bass and I discuss the emotionally mature male brain. I talked about how I have not experienced joy since my dog Patches, the sweetest little dog in the whole wide world, passed away in April of 2020. And when I say I haven't experienced joy since Patches passed away, it's not to say that I have not experienced happiness, nor is it to say I've been wallowing in depression this entire time. What I mean is that I have not experienced that feeling of elation that comes from joy since her passing until now. Because when I am in Seoul, surrounded by the people I continue to meet from all over the world, thanks to my friend Iggy Lee's Soul Share and Soul Walker meetup communities, as well as Mr. Kim's Climbing in Korea meetup group, I feel immense joy. So, for example, Last month, I had what I would call a top 10 day. I went hiking with my friend Vance, who I met through CIK's climbing in Korea, and my friend Zen, who I met during a Seoul Share event where we got a tour of a local Korean market. Now, Vance has probably been one of my best friends here in Seoul ever since we met. Vance moved his son and his wife to Seoul last summer because, as he put it, they've been wanting to do something like this for a while, but, as will happen, life kept getting in the way. But then all of a sudden, all these green lights to Korea started popping up. So they took the necessary steps to make this move happen. So needless to say, he and I have a lot in common when it comes to our own midlife pivots. Now, Zen is going through her own midlife transition. So we all shared our stories and our experiences during our hike together. And to be honest, I've talked to a lot of people who are in this life transition, whether it be a midlife transition, a quarter life transition, a 30-something transition. And for some reason, they come to Seoul to sort these things out. And maybe it's the way Seoul blends the traditional with the future, or maybe it's the way it's one of the largest metropolitan cities in the world, yet it's still surrounded by these beautiful mountains and nature. But there's something about Seoul and its energy that makes this city so welcoming to people like me trying to make sense of themselves. Anyway, Vance and I recently completed this 2,022 meter Seoul hiking challenge sponsored by CIK, where we had to hike 4 different peaks in the Seoul area, totaling 2,022 meters high. So on this day, we decided to hike Inwangsan and Bukaksan on the north end of Seoul. And since it was Zen's last day in Korea, I invited her to join us so she could take in the views of the city from above as well. Now, going back to that idea of Seoul being a metropolis surrounded by nature, one of the best parts of Seoul is that you can get to the hiking trails that lead into the surrounding mountain ranges by subway. It's so easy. It's so sweet. Bukhansan National Park is to the north of the city, and there are several subway lines that take you to peaks like Dobangsan and Baegundae, which is the highest peak in Seoul. Now, Inwangsan and Bukaksan are a little shorter. They're only 338 and 342 meters respectively. But the views are still spectacular, and the weather that day was absolutely ideal for hiking. Now, I won't give you a play-by-play of the day, but needless to say, I would have been okay with that day never ending. And that's what I mean by a top 10 day. It's not necessarily that it's one of the 10 best days of my life, but if I live to be 80 years of age, I'll have lived 29,220 days. 10% of that would be just under 3,000 days. Now, there's that old corny saying that goes, it's not how many breaths you take, but how many moments that take your breath away. I don't need moments that literally take my breath away, but I do want more moments in my life that elicit that somatic experience created by that feeling of joy. Now, another one of my favorite quotes comes from the book Into the Wild. And that book is about Christopher McCandless, who ventured out into the Alaskan wilderness by himself and died as a result of eating poison berries. And you're probably like, wait, what? Like, that would be reason for me not to travel solo. And it's like, you have to read the book because there are some of these realizations that he makes. And one of the realizations that he comes to while he's out on the last frontier is that happiness is only real when shared. And for those of you who are out there listening and you think that sounds codependent and that we shouldn't rely on others to experience happiness, I agree. But if you're a quality time person like I am, you know that having meaningful moments with someone special fills your love bucket. And though I've had top 10 days during the past year on my own, most of them involved sharing an experience with someone else. And if that person is experiencing that moment together with you at a similar level of joy and gratitude, that moment is amplified and becomes even more meaningful to both of you. Just like it says in the title of episode 70, joy is doubled when shared, sorrow is halved when shared. So that's what I mean by a top 10 day. Now, the friends that I have made here in Seoul are special to me. And I'll tell you why. These meetup groups know one thing is true. Nothing lasts forever. People come and go in these groups as long-term travelers like me and Sveka from Sweden, short-term travelers like January and David from Washington, D.C., students like Vivi from Switzerland and Dylan from Canada, workers assigned to Korea like Rich from Hawaii and Jesse from China, and digital nomads like Ben from New York. So when we see each other at an event, we get so excited because when there's so much to do and see in Seoul, the communities that meetup groups like SoulShare, Soul Walkers, and CIK have created here are what enhance our shared common lived experiences. But at the same time, we know that this event we're both attending might be the last time we see each other. We hope not. We exchange information with each other. We follow each other on Instagram. We promise to stay connected. And we make plans to meet up again somewhere else in the world. But we also understand, just as Jay Shetty says in his book, How to Live Like a Monk, which I cannot recommend strongly enough, that people come into our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And when I was in Seoul last spring, I thought I was just here for a season. I had only planned to stay for 6 weeks. But when I was talking to my Airbnb host, who eventually became my wonderful friend Ernie, I told him that if I left Korea at the end of May, like I was planning to do, that it would feel like an unwritten chapter of my life. So I made all the necessary arrangements to change my original course, which if you've listened to this show, you know how much I like structure and routine and a plan. So you know that it was a big deal for me to extend my time here in Seoul until July because that wasn't part of my original plan. And not only that, but I did not expect that the joy I would feel because of these new friendships would lead me back here again this fall. But as it turns out, I'm back in Seoul for a reason. And that reason is to completely feel joy once again. So you may be wondering, well, then how do I go about feeling this similar joyful sensation? Do I have to go and travel in order to have this experience? You have all this time. You quit your job. Do I have to quit my job and do all that? No, it's actually much, much easier than that. So we're going to take a quick break. And then when I come back, I'm going to share with you some of the intentional steps I have taken to experience more joy in my life and that you can simplify and take in order to experience more joy in your life. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. New episodes come out every Wednesday to help you get over the midweek hump. If you'd like to contact me, or if you have suggestions about what you'd like to hear on the show, visit www.mindfulmidlifecrisis.com and click Contact Us. While you're there, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. You can also click on the show notes for links to the articles and resources we reference throughout the show. If you want to check out my worldly adventures, follow me on Instagram at mindful_midlife_crisis. My hope is that my trials, tribulations, and successes will inspire you to take intentional action to live a more purpose-filled life. And while you're at it, remember to show yourself some love every now and then, too. Thanks again. And now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. I'm talking about how I've intentionally cultivated experiencing more joy in my life. And I know some of you might be saying, yeah, you have all the time in the world, dude. You're traveling. I'm sure it's pretty easy to experience joy when that's your life. And listen, I'm not going to lie. It does make it a lot easier. It really does. It's kind of nice. But I'll also tell you this, that even when I was traveling last year through Portugal and Spain and on down the Oregon coast, and if you listen to those season 5 episodes, you can hear the distress in my voice because I simply could not embrace and hold on to those moments of joy that I was experiencing for very long because I was dragging around with me all of these old wounds that I had never allowed myself to heal from. And I was wallowing in uncertainty and gray areas, as our friend Carrie Schweer from episode 61 calls them. So I had to do a lot of intentional work to heal from those old wounds and grow as a person. And listen, you don't need to quit your job and travel the world for a year to do it. Because even though that's what I did, sure, I was still struggling emotionally because I hadn't taken the necessary steps to quiet the storm of self-limiting beliefs and heal from the adverse conflicts that were still bubbling up from my old job. And because of that, the narratives I was telling myself kept getting in the way of fully experiencing that somatic feeling of joy. So, what's changed? Well, I think the biggest realization I came to last June was that I'm a people pleaser. And I was spending way too much time investing in people who did not value or invest in me. And once I made the conscious decision to stop doing that, I became more resolute when it came to reciprocity in communication and energy. If people weren't putting in the same amount of effort I was putting into a relationship, I just stopped putting in the work, especially if it was a newer relationship. If the new people I was meeting weren't excited to meet me and weren't interested in putting in the same amount of effort I was putting into meeting them, then I just stopped communicating with them and put the ball in their court. And once I made this conscious choice to stop people pleasing and stop going above and beyond for a one-way relationship, I found myself able to detach from the expectations that had always made me feel so empty when others didn't live up to them before. That was the biggest step I took in allowing myself to experience joy. Now, I would say that equally as important to this was continually meeting new people through the meetup groups. I'm telling you now that if you're feeling isolated or if you want to meet a new group of people and introduce a new social circle into your life, maybe just a handful of people who share common interests, meetup is the way to go. I can't stress this enough. I really, really enjoy meeting people through meetup. If you're worried about not knowing anyone, the good news is that one or two things will likely happen. Either almost everyone else in the group will also not know anyone and will just be happy to connect with you, or the group will be so inviting and welcoming that you'll immediately feel like you belong. Genuinely connecting with strangers, even if it's just a brief elevator or subway interaction, may be the jolt of joy you need to carry you through the rest of your day. My dad used to do this all the time, and it drove me nuts because it would embarrass the hell out of me. But people really enjoy being around my dad. And I think it's because he has this natural ability to engage people, especially strangers. It's an incredible skill that he possesses, and it's an effortless skill that he possesses. In fact, I was reading this article the other day, and I'm going to cite it through this next part here, and I'll link it in the show notes too. The article is called Exactly How to Find Joy Today and Every Day by Melissa Goldberg. And she quotes Professor of Psychology Elizabeth Dunn, PhD of the University of British Columbia, as saying, social interaction is the thing that most reliably increases people's positive emotions, whether you're introverted or extroverted. So introverts, you do not have an excuse here. It's going to be harder, but you don't have an excuse. This is especially important for you men out there. Go all the way back and listen to episode 2 if you need more proof as to why men need social interaction. I'm planning to do a whole series of episodes on this in the future, but ladies, encourage your men to attend social engagements and encourage them to make new friends. Bring them with you. Bring them with you. And men, stop complaining about going to these social engagements, these dinner parties. And how about instead you invest in having meaningful conversations while you're there with the people who are there? I have met some absolutely amazing people during my travels, and it all started with engaging the stranger next to me. So here's an example of that. I was walking back from a sunset from a cliff one time, and I overheard these two people having a conversation in English, and one of them sounded like a solo traveler. So I just turned around and I was like, hey man, it sounds like you're a solo traveler as well. Are you interested in hanging out while we're in Portugal at the same time? And it just turned out to be this dude, Chiro, who's from Italy. and he lives in Sweden, and he was traveling through Lisbon for 3 weeks around the same time that I was. And he and I ended up having a blast together. And it was just a great connection to make. And if you want, you can go back and listen to episode 39 if you want a list of all the strangers who made my time in Portugal, Spain, and Dakar that much better, simply because we took the chance to talk to each other, even though we didn't know each other. And if anyone knows how to get in contact with the founder of Meetup, let me know, because I want to have him on the show so I could personally thank him for his platform, because without it, I wouldn't be back in Seoul experiencing this level of joy I'm experiencing these days. Another thing I recently started doing was I took Dr. Haji's advice and I started performing more acts of service. Namely, every Tuesday, I lead a virtual mindfulness session with the Soul Share community. And I'm opening that up to listeners of this podcast as well. So if you're interested in joining those virtual mindfulness sessions, they're at 8 p.m. Korean Standard Time, which isn't the most ideal time for most Americans. But I'm also putting those meditations on the Mindful Midlife Crisis podcast YouTube page. So if you want to follow along with those there, go for it. Not only that, but because I've been so involved in the Soul Share community, Iggy asked me if I'd like to host some Soul Share meetup events. So I've been volunteering my time to take people to places like Seoul Grand Park and organizing events to see live music from our friends, the Johnny Birds. And I'll link their EP on Spotify in the show notes so you can go check them out as well, because they are a phenomenal band. And they even asked me to MC one of their gigs, and I introduced them at the show because they saw how much I enjoy talking to a live audience on a microphone. So all of this giving back has helped me find my groove here in Seoul and live presently with joy as well. Another thing I've been doing is I've been committing myself to a routine in the morning. I usually get out of bed around 7, and then I take a long shower where I'll actually sit and do a meditation with the hot water running over me. And then I'll do my little morning mobility routine. And then I'll go work out in the gym downstairs, because I intentionally chose an office tel here in Seoul with the gym so I could get back into the habit of working out, because I always feel better about myself when I feel fit. So that's kind of a 3-for-1 deal right there, because routines, mindfulness, and exercise can all help us experience more joy, according to this article from Melissa Goldberg that I cited before. And what's cool is, like, I've been doing these things on my own, and here I am finding out that there's actual research around routines and exercise helping us feel more joy. So can you budget more time in your day for those kind of things? And if you're like, I can't, contact me. I love doing time inventories with people. We can take a look at how you are utilizing your time so we can be more efficient. Part of my mindfulness practice has been intentionally expressing my gratitude for all of these experiences that I've had. And I think the tragedy in Itaewon reinforced the importance of gratitude. My friend Millie from Vietnam put it best. She said, "There's so much beauty and pain and parallel with each other in this world that we must remember to extend gratitude for what we have in our lives so that we can be happy." And that really resonated with me, because I was struggling with this sense of guilt for enjoying my life when so many people lost their lives in Itaewon. And we take time to mourn, and then we take time to express our gratitude, and then we're able to be present with that gratitude. And then that presence of gratitude allows us to experience joy while still being mindful of the world around us and the tragedy around us. And it's just kind of this cycle that brings us back to gratitude. Now, another thing I've done, if you listen to our conversation with the clutter-free queen, Janet M. Taylor, it's episode 54, then you know that I don't like keeping a lot of clutter around my spaces, because a clutter-free space brings me joy. Too much clutter drives me nuts. That's why I can't be at my dad's house, right? But one thing that I do keep at my dad's house is a smile file. And basically, it's every thank you note or graduation invitation I ever received during my time in education. Sometimes I'll go through those and smile at those classroom memories because despite the challenges I face as an educator, those connections still mean the world to me. And I still think about those students from time to time, and I hope they're doing well. Finally, and I'll bring it back around full circle here, I keep 2 lists in the Notes app on my phone. One is a list of top 10 days, and I assure you, my hike with Vance and Zen is on that list. But secondly, I keep a list of the nicest compliments people have ever given to me. These serve as reminders as to why people value my friendship and my company. So when I'm feeling unappreciated, I look back at these compliments and I'm reminded why I matter and what impact I've had on people in my life. Now, one of those compliments came from my good friend Mike Calverts, who said, "Billy, what I like about you is that when you're excited about something, you want everyone else to be excited about it as well." And one thing that I genuinely look forward to on a weekly basis is my BetterHelp therapy appointment. Now, I'm going to be very clear here. This is not a commercial for BetterHelp. They are not a sponsor in any way, shape, or form yet. BetterHelp, if you'd like to sponsor, I'd love for you to be a sponsor of the show. I think we have a similar mission. I personally just love using BetterHelp so much that I will promote it here right now in this episode. I was matched with a licensed therapist based on my preferences and what I'm looking for in a therapist. And she does an amazing job of helping me process the overwhelming amount of thoughts I have running through my head throughout any given moment, which is so many thoughts. And this in turn has helped me embrace more joy as well. In fact, talking to my therapist on a weekly basis has helped me reframe and let go of some of those self-limiting thoughts I had when I first arrived in Seoul. And again, BetterHelp is not a sponsor, but I'm a huge advocate of therapy because if you go back and listen to episode 3, you'll hear about how therapy and mindfulness not only changed my life, but most likely saved it as well. So if you're looking for some affordable mental health services, you can get a free week of BetterHelp by going to the show notes and clicking on the referral link. Just to be transparent, if you sign up, I also get a free week, but if you sign up, then you'll get your own referral link that you can share. And if one of your friends or family members or colleagues signs up using your referral link, then you get a free week and it becomes this beautiful pay it forward cycle of emotional support and healing that allows us to experience and live with more joy in our lives, which, in my opinion, we all could use a little more of these days. So check out the show notes for that referral link. I wish I would have started using the service a year ago when I first started traveling and transitioning, because when you're doing something like this alone, it can feel overwhelming. So it's nice to have a licensed therapist to help you process everything so you too can live more mindfully and presently in your moments of joy. Now, if you found joy in this week's episode, be sure to look in the show notes for all of my contact information. Don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple listener, please leave us a 5-star review with a few kind words. And if you're a Spotify listener, click those 5 stars under the show art. There are a lot of resources in this week's show notes, so be sure to look at those. Finally, remember that sharing is caring, and I would greatly appreciate it if you would share this episode with the people in your life who may benefit from living more mindfully and presently in their moments of joy. So with that, this is Billy. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. May you feel happy, healthy, and loved. Take care, friends. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Mindful Midlife Crisis podcast. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If this episode resonates with you, please share it with your family and friends. We will do our best to put out new content every Wednesday to get you over the midweek hump. If you want episodes to be downloaded automatically to your phone each week, all you need to do is hit the checkmark, subscribe, like, or follow button, depending on what podcast format you're using. While you're at it, feel free to leave our show a quick 5-star review with a few kind words so more people like you can easily find our show. If you're really enjoying the show and you want to help us out, feel free to make a donation to www.buymeacoffee.com/MMC podcast. That's www.buymeacoffee.com/MMC podcast. You can also access the link in our show notes. We use the money from these donations to pay whatever expenses we incur from producing the show, but ultimately, we record this show for you. So if you keep listening, we'll keep recording and releasing new episodes each week regardless. If you'd like to contact us, or if you have suggestions about what you'd like us to discuss on future episodes, feel free to email us at mindfulmidlifecrisis@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at mindful_midlife_crisis. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the articles and resources we reference throughout the show. Thanks again for listening. May you feel happy, healthy, and loved.